Hey there, history enthusiasts. Tonight we're stepping aboard the Titanic on that freezing April night in 1912 and forget everything Hollywood has romanticized about this disaster. We're not talking about Leonardo DiCaprio's love story or the band nobly playing Nearer My God to Thee. We're talking about a world where you have exactly 4 minutes to live once you hit the water, where mothers are literally throwing their babies toward lifeboats they'll never reach themselves, and where the screams of 500 people freezing to death echo across the black Atlantic for nearly an hour. This is the brutal reality behind every sanitized textbook account of maritime disasters. We're about to experience what it actually meant when unsinkable engineering met immutable physics. You'll witness third-class passengers trapped behind locked gates as the ship tilts toward vertical watch crew members making split-second decisions about who lives and who dies, and understand why the women and children first rule often became a death sentence for entire families. But that's just the beginning. Tonight, we'll also journey through 4 other moments when human ambition collided catastrophically with forces beyond our control, from the Hindenburg's hydrogen-fueled inferno to Pompeii's pyroclastic flows from space shuttles that became fireballs to expeditions that vanished without trace in Earth's most hostile environments. So settle in, dim the lights, and prepare yourself for a journey into moments when cutting-edge technology, meticulous planning, and absolute confidence met their match against indifferent natural forces. Because after tonight you'll realize that every safety regulation, every emergency protocol, every backup system you rely on was written in the blood of people who trusted their lives to machines that failed them when it mattered most. Welcome to the world where human ingenuity wasn't enough, and somehow, against all odds, some people still found ways to survive the unsurvivable. Night of April 14th, 1912. The lookouts in Titanic's crow's nest see something that shouldn't exist in these waters. A dark mass looming dead ahead, growing larger with terrifying speed. Frederick Fleet grabs the telephone and rings the bridge. Iceberg right ahead. First Officer Murdoch orders hard a starboard, full astern. But the laws of physics care nothing for human desperation. The largest moving object ever created by man travelling at 22 knots cannot stop or turn fast enough to avoid its appointment with destiny. You feel a slight tremor run through the ship, barely noticeable if you're awake, not enough to wake you if you're sleeping. You might dismiss it as the engine's shifting gear or a small wave hitting the hull. You have no idea that your life expectancy has just been reduced to less than 3 hours, and that your chances of survival depend not on your character courage or even luck, but on an arbitrary combination of your ticket class, your gender, and your proximity to the boat deck, when the reality of the situation finally becomes clear. Welcome aboard the Titanic on the last night of her maiden voyage, where you're about to discover that the most advanced technology of the age is no match for ice physics and the brutal mathematics of disaster. This isn't a story about heroes and villains. It's about ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances where survival often depended less on noble qualities than on random factors beyond anyone's control. The collision between Titanic and the iceberg lasted only about 37 seconds, but in that brief time, the laws of physics wrote a death sentence for more than 1,500 people. The impact wasn't dramatic. No thunderous crash, no violent shaking, no obvious sign that anything catastrophic had occurred. This subtle nature of the collision would prove almost as deadly as the damage itself, as it delayed recognition of the crisis and squandered precious time that could have saved lives. Most passengers felt nothing more than a slight vibration, like a giant hand gently bumping the ship. Those in first class, located in the middle of the vessel where motion was minimal, might have noticed only the briefest pause in their conversations. Third-class passengers closer to the point of impact felt a more pronounced jolt, but nothing that suggested mortal danger. The iceberg scraped along Titanic's starboard side for about 400 feet, opening a series of small punctures below the waterline. These weren't gaping wounds, but relatively narrow slits, some no wider than a person's finger. Yet collectively they spelled doom for the unsinkable ship. The ocean began pouring into the forward compartments at a rate of about 400 tons per minute, far beyond the capacity of the ship's pumps to manage. Captain Edward Smith, awakened by the collision, rushed to the bridge to assess the situation. His first instincts were conservative. order the engines stopped, close the watertight doors, and send for the ship's designer Thomas Andrews to evaluate the damage. These were reasonable responses based on decades of maritime experience, but they assumed that Titanic was like other ships, damaged but survivable. The initial confusion extended throughout the ship's hierarchy. Many officers, crew members, and passengers alike assumed they were dealing with a minor incident that would delay their arrival in New York but posed no serious threat. The wireless operators continued their routine work. The kitchen staff prepared for the next day's meals, and most passengers either remained asleep or returned to their cabins after a brief investigation of the unusual sound. This period of confused normalcy lasted roughly 30 minutes, precious time during which organized evacuation could have begun, but didn't because no one yet understood the magnitude of what had occurred. The delay would prove catastrophic as it compressed the available time for evacuation and contributed to the panic that would soon follow. Thomas Andrews' inspection revealed the horrible truth. Titanic could survive flooding in any 3 of her 16 compartments, but the iceberg had breached the first 5. Simple mathematics determined the ship's fate. She would sink, and nothing could prevent it. The only question was how long the process would take, and Andrews' calculations were grimly precise: 1 hour, perhaps 90 minutes at most. When Andrews delivered this verdict to Captain Smith around 12:15 a.m., the reality of the situation began to dawn on the ship's leadership. Orders went out to prepare the lifeboats, wake the passengers, and send distress signals. But even then, many crew members and officers struggled to accept that the unsinkable ship was actually doomed. The concept was so foreign to their experience and training that they couldn't fully process it. The Titanic disaster is often remembered for the heroism of the band playing on deck and the gallantry of men giving up their seats in lifeboats for women and children. But the mathematical reality of the situation was far more brutal than these noble gestures suggest. The ship carried lifeboats for only 178 people, less than 1/3 of the 224 souls aboard. This wasn't criminal negligence, but legal compliance. Maritime regulations required lifeboat capacity based on ship tonnage, not passenger count, and Titanic actually exceeded legal requirements. The shortage wasn't immediately obvious to passengers who saw large lifeboats stationed around the deck and assumed adequate provision had been made for their safety. The boats themselves were substantial craft, capable of holding 65 people each, and their very presence suggested that evacuation, while inconvenient, would be manageable. The reality was that 46 people were mathematically doomed from the moment of collision, regardless of their actions, behavior, or moral character. This arithmetic of survival created impossible choices for everyone involved. Crew members faced the agonizing decision of whom to save and whom to leave behind. Passengers who understood the situation had to choose between their own survival and their humanity. Families were torn apart as wives and children were loaded into boats while husbands and fathers remained on deck, knowing they faced almost certain death. The loading process was further complicated by the crew's inexperience with emergency procedures. Many had never participated in a full lifeboat drill, and some were unfamiliar with the davit systems used to lower the boats. Critical time was lost to mechanical problems, confusion about capacity, and uncertainty about procedures. Some boats were lowered only half full because officers feared they might buckle under the weight of their full complement. The women and children first protocol, while noble in intention, created additional complications in practice. Many women refused to leave their husbands, so men disguised themselves in women's clothing, and children were separated from parents in the confusion. The policy wasn't uniformly enforced across the ship, leading to inconsistent application and resentment among those denied access to boats. Perhaps most tragically, the lifeboat shortage meant that even perfect execution of evacuation procedures couldn't have saved everyone. The mathematics were inexorable. Roughly 500 people would die regardless of their courage, preparation, or moral worth. This harsh reality transformed individual survival from a matter of personal merit into a largely random selection process that destroyed any pretense of fairness or justice. The North Atlantic in April maintains water temperatures between 28 and 32 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to kill a healthy adult in 15 to 30 minutes. When Titanic's hull finally disappeared beneath the surface at 2:20 a.m., Roughly 1,500 people were plunged into water so cold that it attacked their bodies with the efficiency of a weapon specifically designed to kill human beings. The initial shock of immersion in near-freezing water triggers an automatic gasp reflex that can cause immediate drowning if the person's head is underwater. Those who survived this first critical moment faced a more insidious enemy, hypothermia. The cold water rapidly drained heat from their bodies, beginning with extremities and working inward toward vital organs. The process wasn't peaceful. As core body temperature dropped, victims experienced violent shivering disorientation and loss of motor control. Many couldn't maintain their grip on floating debris and slipped beneath the surface long before hypothermia actually killed them. Others lost the ability to keep their heads above water as their strength failed and their breathing became labored. The sounds from the water were perhaps the most horrifying aspect of the disaster for those safely in lifeboats. Hundreds of voices created a chorus of desperation, calling for help, crying out names of loved ones, praying and gradually falling silent as hypothermia claimed them one by one. Survivors in lifeboats described the sound as rising and falling like a wave, slowly diminishing over the course of an hour until only occasional cries pierced the darkness. Life jackets, while preventing drowning, actually prolonged the agony by keeping people conscious and upright in the deadly water. Without flotation devices, people would have drowned quickly and relatively peacefully. With them, they remained aware and suffering as the cold slowly shut down their bodies. The life jackets that were meant to save lives instead extended the dying process. Only a handful of people were pulled from the water alive by returning lifeboats, despite the fact that many boats were only partially filled and could have accommodated more survivors. The reluctance to return stemmed from genuine fear that desperate people in the water would swamp the boats, killing everyone. This created a tragic irony. The very people the lifeboats were meant to save were seen as threats to those already saved. The few who did survive in the water long enough to be rescued were typically young, physically fit men who had found floating debris for partial insulation and had the strength to endure the cold longer than others. Their survival often came at the cost of others who couldn't compete for the limited floating materials that provided some protection from the deadly water. The Titanic disaster starkly revealed the class divisions that characterized Edwardian society, as social hierarchies influenced everything from the clarity of emergency information to access to lifeboats and survival rates. The ship's design literally embodied class distinctions, with first-class passengers enjoying the best accommodations and easiest access to safety equipment, while third-class passengers found themselves trapped below decks by both physical barriers and social protocols. First-class passengers housed on the upper decks near the lifeboats received clear information about the emergency and were actively assisted in reaching evacuation points. Crew members personally visited first-class cabins to wake passengers and guide them to safety. These passengers had the shortest distance to travel and encountered no locked doors or bureaucratic obstacles in their path to the boat deck. Second-class passengers received less personalized attention, but generally had reasonable access to emergency information and evacuation routes. Their accommodations in the ship's middle sections provided relatively direct access to lifeboats, though they often had to compete with first-class passengers for space and crew attention. Third-class passengers faced systematic disadvantages that significantly reduced their survival chances. Located in the ship's lower decks, they had the farthest to travel to reach lifeboats. Many of the passages between third-class quarters and the boat deck were locked or blocked, forcing passengers to find alternate routes through unfamiliar parts of the ship. Some gates that separated third-class areas from other sections of the ship remained locked even during the emergency, trapping passengers below decks. Language barriers compounded these problems, as many third-class passengers spoke little or no English and couldn't understand emergency instructions or directions to safety. Crew members focused on assisting first and second-class passengers provided minimal help to third-class travelers who needed guidance most desperately. The survival statistics reveal the stark impact of these class distinctions. Approximately 60% of first-class passengers survived, compared to 42% of second-class passengers and only 24% of third-class passengers. These numbers weren't the result of first-class passengers behaving more bravely or third-class passengers panicking more readily. They reflected structural inequalities built into the ship's design and emergency procedures. Women and children in first class had a 97% survival rate, while women and children in third class survived at only 49%. a devastating illustration of how social status influenced access to safety, even when gender and age should have provided protection. The Women and Children First protocol was effectively first-class women and children first, with others saved only if space remained. The class distinctions continued even in death as recovery ships focused their efforts on first-class victims and paid little attention to third-class passengers. First-class bodies were embalmed and returned to families, while many third-class victims were buried at sea or in unmarked graves. Even in death, Edwardian society maintained its hierarchies. The wireless distress calls from Titanic revealed both the potential and limitations of early 20th century communication technology. The ship's Marconi wireless equipment was state-of-the-art, capable of transmitting messages hundreds of miles across the ocean. But the effectiveness of these calls depended on other ships having operators on duty, understanding the severity of the situation, and being close enough to provide assistance. Titanic's first distress call went out at 12:15 a.m., about 35 minutes after the collision. The message used the traditional CQD distress signal before switching to the newer SOS, making this one of the first major disasters to employ the now universal distress call. But having the most advanced communication equipment meant nothing if no one was listening or capable of responding effectively. The nearest ship, SS Californian, was only about 20 miles away, but had shut down its wireless operation for the night. The ship's single radio operator had gone to bed, leaving no one to monitor emergency frequencies. Some crew members on Californian reportedly saw rockets fired from Titanic's direction, but dismissed them as non-distress signals, a fatal misinterpretation that could have saved hundreds of lives. The ship that ultimately responded to Titanic's calls, RMS Carpathia, was 58 miles away, a distance that would take nearly 4 hours to cover at maximum speed. Captain Arthur Rostron immediately ordered full speed ahead and made preparations to receive survivors, but the laws of physics meant that Carpathia couldn't arrive before Titanic sank. The best they could hope for was to rescue survivors from lifeboats in the water. Other ships received Titanic's distress calls, but were too far away to provide meaningful assistance. SS Burma, SS Frankfurt, and SS Virginian all acknowledged the emergency and changed course toward the sinking ship, but none could reach the scene in time to affect the outcome. The wireless calls succeeded in alerting the maritime world to the disaster, but failed in their primary purpose of summoning immediate help. The communication delays also affected the accuracy of information reaching the outside world. Early wireless messages suggested that Titanic was damaged but stable, leading to premature reports that all passengers were safe. These optimistic messages persisted for hours after the ship had actually sunk, creating false hope among families and complicating rescue efforts. The technology that was supposed to make ocean travel safer had instead created a false sense of security. Wireless communication gave passengers and crew confidence that help could always be summoned, but Titanic's fate demonstrated that being able to call for help meant nothing if that help couldn't arrive in time. As Titanic's hull disappeared beneath the surface, taking with it the light's warmth and illusion of safety that had sustained survivors through the night, those in lifeboats faced a new phase of their ordeal. Scattered across miles of dark ocean in small, overcrowded boats, they had to endure hours of uncertainty, cold, and fear before rescue arrived. The lifeboats themselves were basic survival craft, wooden boats with minimal equipment and no protection from the elements. Passengers huddled together for warmth while spray from the calm but cold sea soaked their clothing. Many wore only nightgowns or light clothing, having been roused from sleep with no time to dress properly for an ocean voyage in an open boat. Leadership in the boats varied dramatically. Some were commanded by experienced officers who maintained discipline and organization, rationing water and food while keeping morale up through the long night. Others were overseen by junior crew members with little experience in small boat management, leading to confusion and conflict among passengers. The psychological impact of watching Titanic's final moments traumatized many survivors permanently. As the ship's stern rose high into the air, before plunging into the depths, those in lifeboats witnessed the end of what had seemed impossible just hours before. The sight and sound of the great ship's death throes, the grinding of metal, the explosion of boilers, the screams of those still aboard, haunted survivors for the rest of their lives. Tensions arose in several lifeboats between different classes of passengers who found themselves forced together in circumstances that eliminated their usual social boundaries. First-class women sat next to third-class men crew members, gave orders to wealthy industrialists, and normal hierarchies dissolved in the face of shared danger. Some adapted to these changed circumstances gracefully, while others struggled with the reversal of familiar social orders. The hours of waiting tested human endurance and character in ways that revealed both nobility and selfishness. Some passengers shared their limited clothing and food with others, while some hoarded what little they had. Arguments broke out over rowing duties, direction of travel, and whether to return for survivors in the water. The stress of survival stripped away social pretenses and revealed fundamental aspects of human nature. When Carpathia finally appeared on the horizon around 3:30 a.m., the sight of the rescue ship's lights brought tears of relief and gratitude from survivors who had spent hours uncertain whether they would live to see another dawn. But even rescue carried its own traumas as survivors faced the reality of their losses and began to comprehend the magnitude of the disaster they had experienced. The process of being brought aboard Carpathia was difficult and dangerous for survivors weakened by hours of exposure and trauma. Many had to be lifted from lifeboats in baskets or on stretchers, while others barely had the strength to climb rope ladders. Medical treatment was basic, focusing on warming victims and treating hypothermia cuts and shock. As survivors gathered on Carpathia's deck, the full scope of their losses became apparent. Families discovered that loved ones hadn't made it to the lifeboats. Wives learned they were widows, children found they were orphans. The relief of personal survival was tempered by grief for those who hadn't been as fortunate, creating a complex mixture of gratitude and guilt that many survivors carried for the rest of their lives. The journey to New York aboard Carpathia became a time of shock mourning and gradual realization of what had occurred. Survivors struggled to process their experiences while dealing with physical exhaustion and emotional trauma. Many remained in a state of disbelief, unable to accept that the unsinkable ship had actually sunk and that so many people had died. News of the disaster reached the outside world through a combination of wireless reports, survivor testimony, and conflicting information that created confusion and false hope before the full truth emerged. Initial reports suggested that Titanic was damaged but afloat with all passengers safely evacuated. These optimistic accounts persisted for hours, allowing families to believe their loved ones were safe, even as the ship lay on the ocean floor. The wireless communications from rescue ships gradually painted a clearer but grimmer picture. Reports mentioned lifeboats being picked up, survivors being counted, and requests for medical assistance, but the numbers didn't add up to the full passenger manifest. As more detailed information emerged, the scope of the tragedy became apparent. Newspapers around the world struggled to verify information and provide accurate reporting while dealing with incomplete and sometimes contradictory reports. The story evolved from minor shipping incident to maritime disaster to international tragedy as the death toll became clear. The complexity of gathering accurate information in the pre-internet age meant that families often learned their loved ones' fates from newspaper reports rather than official notifications. The public response to the disaster reflected the social attitudes and tensions of the Edwardian era. Stories of heroism and sacrifice reinforced contemporary ideals about courage and social duty, while criticism of inadequate safety measures reflected growing demands for regulation and accountability. The disaster became a symbol of both human nobility and technological hubris. In Britain and America, the sinking prompted immediate calls for improved maritime safety regulations, better lifeboat requirements, and more effective emergency procedures. The disaster had demonstrated that existing safety measures were inadequate for ships of Titanic's size and passenger capacity. New regulations would require sufficient lifeboats for all passengers and crew, 24-hour wireless monitoring, and improved emergency training. The class distinctions revealed by the survival statistics sparked social commentary about inequality and privilege. Critics pointed out that the wealthy passengers' better survival rates reflected systematic advantages rather than superior moral character. This criticism contributed to broader discussions about social justice and the rights of working-class people that would influence political movements in the coming decades. The heroism of individual crew members and passengers became the focus of popular accounts that emphasized personal courage over systemic failures. Stories of the ship's band playing until the end of men giving up lifeboat seats for women and children, and of crew members staying at their posts. Despite certain death became central to the disaster's mythology. The disaster investigations conducted by both British and American authorities revealed the complex web of factors that had contributed to the tragedy. Poor communication between ships, inadequate safety regulations, insufficient crew training, and overconfidence in technology had all played roles in the disaster. The investigations led to significant improvements in maritime safety that prevented similar tragedies in the future. The long-term impact of the Titanic disaster extended far beyond maritime safety to influence attitudes about technology-class relations and human behavior under extreme stress. The sinking became a metaphor for the dangers of overconfidence and the fragility of human achievements in the face of natural forces. For survivors, the trauma of that night affected the rest of their lives. Many suffered from what we would now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder, experiencing nightmares, anxiety, and difficulty forming normal relationships. Some became reclusive, while others felt compelled to share their experiences repeatedly. The disaster had marked them permanently, creating a bond among survivors while separating them from those who hadn't shared their experience. The families of victims faced their own long-term challenges, dealing with sudden financial hardship, social stigma, and unresolved grief. Widows struggled to support their children alone, while orphaned children faced uncertain futures. The disaster's impact rippled through generations, affecting families and communities in ways that lasted decades. The mythology that grew up around the Titanic disaster often obscured its harsh realities behind romanticized tales of heroism and nobility. The truth was more complex and more disturbing. A technologically advanced society had created a disaster through overconfidence, inadequate regulation, and systematic inequality. The people who died weren't heroes or villains, but ordinary individuals whose survival depended largely on factors beyond their control. Today, Titanic rests on the ocean floor, slowly deteriorating as the sea reclaims the iron and steel that once seemed so permanent and powerful. The ship that was supposed to represent the triumph of human engineering over nature has become a monument to human limitations and the dangers of hubris. The disaster reminds us that technological advancement, without corresponding improvements in safety regulation and social equity, can create catastrophes that claim innocent lives. The mathematics of survival aboard Titanic were brutal and unforgiving, determined more by ticket class and random chance than by moral character or personal courage. Standing on the deck of that great ship as it settled into the freezing Atlantic, you would have faced the same impossible choices and random outcomes that confronted 2,204 other people on the night of April 14, 1912. Your survival would have depended not on your heroism or virtue, but on a complex combination of factors largely beyond your control: where you slept, how quickly you understood the danger, and whether there was space in a lifeboat when you reached the deck. The Titanic disaster reveals both the best and worst of human nature under extreme pressure, showing how quickly civilized behavior can dissolve when survival is at stake, while also demonstrating remarkable courage and self-sacrifice in the face of certain death. It reminds us that disasters don't discriminate based on wealth or social status, even when the systems we create to respond to them do. The ship is gone, the survivors are dead, but the lessons remain that confidence without humility leads to catastrophe, that technological achievement without social progress creates dangerous inequalities, and that in moments of ultimate crisis, our humanity is measured not by our survival, but by how we treat others when everything familiar disappears beneath the dark, cold water. Nikola Tesla's eccentric experiments. In the summer of 1899, a tall, gaunt figure dressed in formal attire stood alone in a wooden laboratory in Colorado Springs, surrounded by massive electrical equipment that crackled and sparked with energies that seemed to defy natural law. Nikola Tesla, already famous for his alternating current motor and wireless technologies, had come to this remote location to conduct experiments so ambitious and seemingly impossible that even his scientific colleagues considered them the work of either a genius or a madman. Tesla believed he could transmit electrical power wirelessly around the entire planet, illuminate light bulbs from hundreds of miles away, and communicate with beings on other worlds. To contemporary observers, these goals seemed like fantasy, the delusions of a brilliant mind that had lost touch with reality. Yet Tesla's experiments in Colorado Springs would lay the groundwork for technologies we use every day: radio wireless communication and remote control, while pushing the boundaries of electrical science into realms that still challenge our understanding today. But Tesla's genius came with a price. His obsessions with numbers divisible by 3, his fear of germs and round objects, his elaborate daily rituals, and his increasing isolation from normal social contact marked him as one of history's most eccentric inventors. The same mental processes that enabled him to visualize complex electrical systems in perfect detail also trapped him in compulsive behaviors and paranoid fantasies that made normal life nearly impossible. Welcome to the laboratory of Nikola Tesla, where the line between scientific breakthrough and obsessive madness blurred until they became indistinguishable, and where one man's vision of electrical utopia nearly drove him to complete mental and financial ruin. Nikola Tesla's laboratory in Colorado Springs was like nothing the world had ever seen. A wooden structure containing electrical equipment so powerful and unconventional that it seemed more like a mad scientist's lair from science fiction than a legitimate research facility. The centerpiece was a massive Tesla coil capable of generating artificial lightning bolts over 100 feet long, creating electrical displays that could be seen for miles, and generated thunder that shook buildings throughout the town. The laboratory building itself was specially designed to house Tesla's experiments, with a tall central tower that could be raised and lowered, depending on the type of electrical phenomena being studied. The structure was built without metal nails or fittings that might interfere with the electrical fields Tesla was creating, using wooden pegs and specialized construction techniques that isolated the equipment from unwanted electrical influences. Inside the laboratory, massive coils wound with thousands of feet of copper wire created electromagnetic fields powerful enough to light fluorescent tubes held in a person's hand from across the room. Tesla could stand in the middle of his laboratory, surrounded by artificial lightning, while electrical currents passed harmlessly through his body, a demonstration that terrified visitors, but which Tesla used to illustrate his theories about the safe transmission of electrical energy. The equipment Tesla constructed in Colorado Springs was years ahead of anything else in existence, much of it built according to his own unique designs and theories. He created oscillators that could generate electrical vibrations at precisely controlled frequencies, transformers that could step up electrical voltages to levels never before achieved, and receivers sensitive enough to detect electrical signals from anywhere on Earth. Tesla's notebooks from this period reveal the methodical nature of his experiments, despite their apparently chaotic appearance. Each day brought new tests of different frequencies, power levels, and configurations as he systematically explored the electrical properties of the Earth itself. He was convinced that the planet could serve as a conductor for wireless power transmission, and his experiments were designed to prove this revolutionary theory. The visual effects of Tesla's experiments became legendary among Colorado Springs residents who would gather at safe distances to watch the spectacular electrical displays emanating from the laboratory. Artificial lightning would dance between metal spheres and rods, creating patterns of electrical discharge that seemed to violate the normal laws of physics. The air itself became charged with electricity, causing strange phenomena throughout the town. Horses would refuse to walk past the laboratory, sensing the electrical fields that humans couldn't detect. Streetlights would glow dimly without being connected to any power source. Metal objects throughout Colorado Springs would spark when touched, and some residents reported receiving mild electrical shocks from water faucets and door handles when Tesla's experiments were operating at full power. Tesla's most ambitious goal was to prove that electrical power could be transmitted wirelessly through the Earth itself, eliminating the need for power lines and making electricity available anywhere on the planet. He believed that the Earth had natural electrical properties that could be harnessed to create a global power distribution system, with properly tuned transmitters and receivers replacing the growing network of copper wires that were beginning to span continents. His experiments involved creating powerful electrical oscillations that would penetrate deep into the Earth and resonate with the planet's natural electrical frequency. Tesla believed he had discovered what he called the fundamental frequency of the Earth, a specific vibration that would allow electrical energy to propagate around the globe with minimal loss. To test these theories, Tesla constructed transmitting equipment capable of sending electrical signals deep into the ground while using sensitive receivers to detect how these signals propagated through the Earth's crust. His measurements suggested that electrical energy could indeed travel through the planet more efficiently than anyone had previously believed possible. The wireless power transmission experiments involved sending electrical energy from his Colorado Springs laboratory to receivers located at various distances, attempting to prove that power could be transmitted without wires over practically unlimited distances. Tesla claimed to have successfully lit electric lights located miles from his laboratory using only wireless transmission, though these claims were difficult for other scientists to verify or replicate. Tesla's experiments also explored the possibility of wireless communication on a global scale decades before radio technology became commercially viable. He transmitted signals that he claimed could be received anywhere on Earth by properly tuned receivers, and he believed he had detected artificial signals from sources outside Earth, possibly communications from inhabitants of other planets. These communications experiments led to one of Tesla's most controversial claims that he had received signals from Mars or other inhabited worlds. Tesla reported detecting rhythmic electrical patterns that seemed too organized to be natural phenomena, leading him to conclude that they represented attempts at communication by extraterrestrial intelligences. While modern scientists believe Tesla probably detected natural radio waves from astronomical sources like pulsars or Jupiter's magnetosphere, his interpretation of these signals as evidence of alien intelligence reflected both his scientific imagination and his increasing tendency toward grandiose theories that extended far beyond available evidence. Tesla's personality was as extraordinary as his scientific achievements, marked by obsessive behaviors, phobias, and compulsions that grew more pronounced as he aged. His daily routines were rigidly structured around elaborate rituals and superstitions that he believed were necessary for his mental and physical health. One of Tesla's most famous obsessions involved the number 3 and its multiples. He would walk around buildings 3 times before entering required 18 napkins at meals divisible by 3 and insisted on staying in hotel rooms with numbers divisible by 3. He calculated the cubic contents of food before eating and would only dine at restaurants where he could perform these calculations accurately. Tesla's fear of germs bordered on the pathological, leading him to wash his hands compulsively and avoid physical contact with other people whenever possible. He would use up to 18 towels per day and insisted that hotel staff provide fresh linens constantly. He wore white gloves whenever possible and would only eat foods that he had personally inspected for cleanliness. His phobia of round objects was so severe that he couldn't tolerate the sight of pearls earrings or anything spherical. Women wearing pearl jewelry were banned from his presence, and he would leave rooms if confronted with round objects that he couldn't avoid. This phobia may have been related to his broader pattern of avoiding anything that seemed chaotic or uncontrolled. Tesla's sleeping habits were as unusual as his other behaviors. He claimed to require only 2 hours of sleep per night, though he would often fall into deep comas during the day that lasted for hours. He believed that excessive sleep was harmful, and that his minimal sleep schedule contributed to his mental clarity and scientific productivity. His eating habits were equally eccentric, involving precise calculations of the nutritional and cubic content of everything he consumed. Tesla would estimate the volume of food and drink with remarkable accuracy, claiming that this mathematical approach to nutrition was essential for maintaining his physical and mental health. He avoided most social dining situations because they interfered with these calculations. Tesla's social interactions became increasingly limited as his eccentricities grew more pronounced. He lived alone in hotel suites, communicated primarily through letters and formal meetings, and avoided casual social contact that might disrupt his rigid daily routines. His isolation was partly self-imposed, and partly the result of others finding his behaviors too strange to tolerate. Despite these eccentricities, Tesla maintained remarkable mental clarity and continued producing innovative scientific ideas throughout his life. His unusual behaviors may have been symptoms of obsessive-compulsive disorder or autism spectrum conditions, but they didn't prevent him from making groundbreaking contributions to electrical science and engineering. Tesla's notebooks reveal a mind capable of extraordinary visualization and mathematical precision. He could design complex electrical devices entirely in his imagination, complete with precise measurements and specifications, then build them exactly as envisioned without needing to make adjustments or corrections. This mental ability allowed him to conceive inventions years before the technology existed to build them practically. While Tesla's experiments in Colorado Springs seemed fantastic to contemporary observers, many of his seemingly impossible predictions have been vindicated by subsequent technological developments. His wireless power transmission experiments laid the groundwork for modern radio technology, while his theories about global communication predicted the development of the internet and cellular phone networks. Tesla's work with high-frequency electrical currents led to the development of technologies we use every day, including radio broadcasting, wireless communication, and remote control devices. His alternating current motor became the foundation for the modern electrical power grid, while his experiments with wireless energy transmission anticipated technologies like wireless charging and satellite power systems that are only now becoming practical. The remote control demonstrations Tesla conducted in the 1890s, making small boats navigate by wireless commands, seemed like magic to audiences who had never seen anything controlled from a distance without physical connections. Modern drones, remote-controlled vehicles, and wireless automation systems all trace their origins to Tesla's early experiments with what he called teleautomation. Tesla's understanding of resonance and frequency has influenced fields far beyond electrical engineering. His theories about the Earth's natural frequencies predicted the discovery of the Schumann resonances, electromagnetic waves that naturally occur in the cavity between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere. Modern GPS systems and radio communication depend on understanding these same atmospheric electrical phenomena that Tesla was among the first to study systematically. Perhaps most remarkably, Tesla's vision of wireless power transmission is finally becoming reality through modern inductive charging systems, wireless power transfer for electric vehicles, and experimental satellite-based solar power systems. The basic principles Tesla explored in Colorado Springs, transmitting energy through electromagnetic fields rather than physical conductors, are now being developed by companies trying to create the wireless power grid he envisioned over a century ago. Tesla's experiments with high-voltage electricity and his demonstrations of its safety when properly applied anticipated modern medical applications of electrical therapy. His understanding that high-frequency electrical currents could pass through the human body without causing harm laid the groundwork for technologies like MRI machines, electrosurgery, and various forms of electrical medical treatment. The financial costs of Tesla's Colorado Springs experiments were enormous, consuming most of his personal fortune and leaving him deeply in debt. The elaborate equipment, the specialized laboratory construction, and the massive electricity bills required to power his experiments far exceeded his available resources. Tesla had convinced investors to fund his research by promising practical applications that would generate enormous profits. But the experimental nature of his work meant that commercial success remained elusive. Tesla's patron during this period was John Jacob Astor IV, who provided substantial funding for the Colorado Springs laboratory in exchange for exclusive rights to Tesla's wireless power transmission technology. Astor believed that Tesla's inventions could revolutionize global communication and power distribution, creating opportunities for unprecedented profits. However, Astor's death aboard the Titanic in 1912 eliminated Tesla's most important source of financial support. The experimental equipment Tesla constructed was so specialized and unique that it had no commercial value once the experiments were complete. Unlike other inventors who could sell their prototypes or adapt their equipment for practical applications, Tesla's massive coils and oscillators were useful only for research purposes. When funding ran out, much of the equipment had to be abandoned or sold for scrap. Tesla's inability to translate his experimental successes into commercially viable products reflected both the advanced nature of his research and his lack of business acumen. While his discoveries were scientifically significant, they were decades ahead of the manufacturing capabilities and market demands of his era. Technologies that seemed impossible in 1900 wouldn't become practical until materials science, electronics, and industrial production methods had advanced sufficiently to support them. The financial pressures of maintaining his research while supporting his increasingly expensive lifestyle created enormous stress that may have contributed to Tesla's growing eccentricities and social isolation. As debts mounted and investors lost confidence, Tesla became more secretive about his work and more grandiose in his claims about future inventions. Tesla's later years were marked by increasingly fantastic claims about inventions that he never successfully demonstrated or explained in detail. He announced the development of a death ray capable of destroying aircraft at distances of hundreds of miles, a world wireless system that would provide free energy to everyone on Earth, and communication devices that could contact other planets. These announcements were often made through press releases and interviews rather than scientific publications, leading many to dismiss them as the fantasies of an aging inventor desperate to regain his former prominence. Tesla's reputation for eccentricity made it difficult for people to distinguish between his genuine scientific insights and his increasingly unrealistic claims. The death ray, or peace ray, that Tesla described in interviews was supposedly a particle beam weapon that could destroy targets at great distances by projecting charged particles at tremendous velocities. Tesla claimed to have built a working prototype, but never demonstrated it publicly or provided technical details that would allow others to evaluate his claims. Tesla's wireless power transmission system, which he called the World Wireless System, was supposed to provide free electrical energy to anyone on Earth who had the proper receiving equipment. He claimed that this system would make power plants and electrical distribution networks obsolete, while providing unlimited energy for all human needs. Despite decades of work on this project, Tesla never successfully demonstrated wireless power transmission over long distances. The interplanetary communication system Tesla described was based on his belief that he had detected signals from Mars during his Colorado Springs experiments. He proposed building massive transmitting stations that could send messages to other inhabited worlds and receive replies from alien civilizations. This project reflected Tesla's conviction that Earth was not the only inhabited planet, and that technological civilizations throughout the universe were trying to communicate with each other. Tesla's relationship with the press became increasingly complex as his claims grew more extraordinary. Journalists were fascinated by his eccentric personality and fantastic inventions, but they struggled to separate legitimate scientific achievements from publicity-seeking announcements. Tesla learned to use media attention to maintain public interest in his work, but this strategy backfired when his claims proved impossible to substantiate. Scientific colleagues who had once respected Tesla's contributions became skeptical of his later claims, particularly when he refused to provide technical details or allow independent verification of his inventions. The scientific community's growing skepticism isolated Tesla further and made it difficult for him to obtain funding for legitimate research projects. Tesla's legacy as an inventor was complicated by the contrast between his documented achievements and his unsubstantiated claims. While his early work on alternating current motors, transformers, and wireless technology was clearly revolutionary, his later announcements about death rays and interplanetary communication seemed to belong more to science fiction than legitimate science. Tesla's final years were spent in relative poverty and isolation, living in New York hotels, while continuing to work on inventions that he claimed would transform civilization. He maintained his rigid daily routines and eccentric behaviors while becoming increasingly reclusive and paranoid. His few remaining friends described him as brilliant but tragically isolated from normal human contact. Despite his financial difficulties and social isolation, Tesla continued to generate new ideas and file patent applications almost until his death in 1943. His notebooks from this period reveal a mind still capable of innovative thinking, though the gap between his theoretical insights and practical applications had grown impossibly wide. Tesla died alone in his hotel room, leaving behind a collection of papers and experimental notes that government agents immediately classified as potentially dangerous to national security. The FBI confiscated his documents, fearing that Tesla's weapons research might be valuable to enemy nations or might contain information about genuinely revolutionary technologies. The classification of Tesla's papers fed speculation about secret government research projects based on his inventions contributing to conspiracy theories about suppressed technologies and hidden scientific breakthroughs. While most of Tesla's later claims were probably impossible with available technology, the secrecy surrounding his final work ensured that questions about his achievements would persist long after his death. Modern evaluation of Tesla's work reveals a complex legacy that includes both genuine scientific breakthroughs and unsubstantiated claims that reflected his increasingly unstable mental state. His contributions to electrical engineering were undeniably revolutionary, forming the foundation for technologies that define modern civilization. His wireless communication experiments preceded and enabled the development of radio television and eventually the internet. Tesla's understanding of electromagnetic phenomena was decades ahead of his contemporaries, allowing him to conceive technologies that wouldn't become practical until materials science and manufacturing capabilities had advanced sufficiently to support them. His alternating current system became the worldwide standard for electrical power distribution, while his polyphase motor designs are still used in applications ranging from household appliances to industrial machinery. The wireless technologies Tesla pioneered evolved into everything from garage door openers to satellite communication systems. His experiments with remote control anticipated the development of drones, robotic systems, and automated manufacturing processes that are reshaping modern industry. Even his seemingly impossible wireless power transmission experiments are being revisited by companies developing wireless charging systems for electric vehicles and portable electronics. Tesla's scientific methodology, despite his personal eccentricities, was remarkably systematic and thorough. His notebooks reveal careful experimental procedures, detailed observations and mathematical analysis that met the highest standards of scientific rigor. His ability to visualize complex systems in complete detail allowed him to design equipment that worked exactly as intended, often on the first attempt. The tragedy of Tesla's life was that his extraordinary scientific intuition was coupled with personality traits that made it increasingly difficult for him to function in normal society or translate his insights into practical applications. His obsessive behaviors, social isolation and grandiose claims overshadowed his legitimate achievements and prevented him from receiving the recognition and support he deserved. Tesla's story illustrates both the power and the perils of scientific genius when it's not balanced by practical wisdom and social skills. His mind could conceive technologies that were decades ahead of their time, but his inability to work effectively with others or adapt his ideas to commercial realities limited his impact during his lifetime. Modern scientists studying Tesla's work are struck by how accurately he predicted technological developments that seemed impossible in his era. His vision of a world connected by wireless communication, powered by electrical grids, and controlled by remote automation has largely come to pass, though through incremental developments rather than the revolutionary breakthroughs he imagined. Tesla's eccentric personality has become inseparable from his scientific legacy, creating a mythology that sometimes obscures his actual achievements. Popular culture often portrays him as either a mad scientist or a misunderstood genius, but the reality was more complex. A brilliant mind trapped by compulsions and obsessions that both enabled and limited his extraordinary capabilities. Standing in the ruins of Tesla's Colorado Springs laboratory today, visitors can still sense the audacity of his vision and the tragedy of his isolation. Here was a man who glimpsed the electrical future of human civilization, but couldn't bridge the gap between his theoretical insights and the practical realities of his time. Tesla's experiments pushed the boundaries of known science, while revealing the personal cost of genius when it's not tempered by social wisdom. His legacy reminds us that the greatest scientific advances often come from individuals willing to challenge conventional thinking, but also shows how brilliance without balance can lead to isolation and unfulfilled potential. The technologies we use every day, from the electrical outlets in our walls to the wireless signals connecting our devices, trace their origins to the experiments conducted by a solitary figure in a wooden laboratory in Colorado Springs, surrounded by artificial lightning and driven by visions of an electrical utopia that was both his greatest achievement and his ultimate obsession. Mayan Astronomical Calculations, 14 minutes. While Europe struggled through what it would later call the Dark Ages, Mayan astronomers were achieving mathematical and astronomical precision that wouldn't be matched by European science for another 1,000 years. Working without telescopes, mechanical clocks, or modern mathematical notation, they calculated planetary cycles with extraordinary accuracy, predicted eclipses centuries into the future, and created calendar systems so sophisticated that they remain more precise than the calendar we use today. But these achievements came at a cost that few modern people could comprehend. Mayan astronomical observations weren't conducted for pure scientific curiosity, but served the demands of a religious and political system that required precise timing for human sacrifice, warfare and royal ceremonies. The same mathematical brilliance that could predict Venus's movements with extraordinary accuracy was used to determine the optimal moments for cutting out human hearts and throwing victims into sacred wells. The Mayan astronomers who achieved these remarkable calculations lived in a world where mathematics and blood sacrifice were inseparably intertwined, where the movements of celestial bodies dictated when cities would go to war and when captives would die, and where astronomical precision served not enlightenment, but the maintenance of political power through religious terror. Welcome to the observatories and temples of ancient Maya, where some of history's most brilliant mathematical minds turned their genius toward predicting the will of gods who demanded endless human offerings, and where scientific achievement served purposes that would horrify modern observers. Mayan mathematics developed independently of Old World systems, creating a mathematical framework so sophisticated that it included concepts like zero and place notation centuries before these ideas appeared in European mathematics. Their numerical system was based on 20 rather than 10, reflecting a different approach to mathematical thinking that enabled them to perform complex calculations with remarkable efficiency. The Mayan concept of zero was not just a placeholder, but a fully developed mathematical entity that they could manipulate in equations and calculations. This understanding allowed them to work with large numbers and perform astronomical calculations that required precision over vast time periods. European mathematics wouldn't develop comparable sophistication in handling zero and place notation until the Renaissance. Mayan mathematical notation used a system of dots and bars that could represent any number, no matter how large, using principles of place value that made complex calculations manageable. A dot represented 1, a bar represented 5, and the position of symbols determined their value in powers of 20. This system enabled scribes to record astronomical observations and predictions with mathematical precision. The mathematical sophistication of Mayan calculations is evident in their ability to work with enormous numbers representing thousands of years of astronomical time. They calculated cycles extending millions of years into both past and future, tracking planetary movements, eclipse cycles, and calendar correlations across time spans that challenged the computational abilities of any ancient civilization. Mayan mathematical texts reveal understanding of advanced concepts, including negative numbers, complex fractions, and proportional relationships that enabled them to solve sophisticated problems in astronomy and engineering. Their mathematical knowledge was closely guarded by priestly classes who used it to maintain their authority over political and religious affairs. The precision of Mayan mathematics enabled them to create astronomical tables that predicted planetary positions and eclipse events with accuracy that wasn't matched by European astronomy until the development of Newtonian mechanics. These calculations required not just mathematical skill, but centuries of careful observation and record-keeping that accumulated into vast databases of astronomical knowledge. Mayan mathematical achievements were recorded in elaborate codices and carved into stone monuments, creating permanent records of their calculations that have allowed modern scholars to appreciate the sophistication of their numerical systems. The survival of these mathematical texts reveals the importance that Mayan civilization placed on preserving and transmitting their computational knowledge. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving Mayan books, contains astronomical tables that demonstrate the extraordinary precision of their mathematical calculations. Eclipse predictions in this codex are accurate to within hours across periods of centuries, revealing computational abilities that rival modern astronomical software. Mayan mathematical education was restricted to elite scribes and priests who underwent decades of training to master the complex calculations required for astronomical and calendar work. This mathematical knowledge was too important to be widely shared, as it formed the basis for the political and religious authority of Mayan ruling classes. Mayan astronomical observations were conducted from specially constructed buildings designed to frame specific celestial events and enable precise measurement of planetary movements. These observatories weren't equipped with optical instruments, but used architectural alignments and sightlines to track the positions of sun, moon, planets, and stars with remarkable accuracy. The palace of the governor at Uxmal is oriented precisely toward the point where Venus reaches its maximum southern position, allowing astronomers to track the planet's complex 8-year cycle with extraordinary precision. The building's doorway frames Venus at this crucial moment, creating a permanent astronomical instrument carved in stone. At Chichen Itza, the Caracol Observatory features windows and openings aligned with various astronomical phenomena, including the extreme positions of Venus and lunar standstills. The building's spiral staircase and multiple levels provided different vantage points for observing celestial events throughout the year. Mayan astronomers tracked not just the obvious movements of Sun and Moon, but the complex cycles of Venus, Mars, Mercury, and Jupiter, calculating their synodic periods, the time required for each planet to return to the same position relative to Earth and Sun. These calculations required centuries of careful observation and mathematical analysis. The Venus cycle was particularly important to Mayan astronomy and warfare. They calculated that Venus completed 5 8-year cycles in almost exactly the same time that Earth completed 8 years, allowing them to predict Venus's positions decades into the future. Warfare and major ceremonies were often timed to coincide with specific phases of Venus's cycle. Mayan eclipse prediction required understanding not just the movements of Sun and Moon, but the complex geometric relationships that determine when Earth, Moon, and Sun align precisely enough to create eclipse conditions. Their eclipse tables could predict both solar and lunar eclipses years in advance with accuracy that impressed even modern astronomers. The precision of Mayan astronomical observations is demonstrated by their calculation of the lunar month as 29.5320 days, remarkably close to the modern value of 29.5309 days. This level of accuracy required centuries of careful observation and mathematical analysis to achieve representing one of the great accomplishments of ancient science. Mayan astronomers also tracked the movements of star groups and constellations, creating stellar calendars that complemented their solar and lunar calculations. They identified and named various constellations, often associating them with mythological narratives that helped encode astronomical knowledge in memorable stories. The Pleiades star cluster was particularly important to Mayan astronomy, as its annual movement across the sky marked seasonal transitions crucial for agriculture and religious ceremonies. Mayan temples and pyramids were often aligned with the rising or setting of specific star groups at important times of year. Mayan observations of the Milky Way, which they called the White Road, or Tree of Life, influenced their cosmological beliefs and architectural designs. Many Mayan buildings are oriented to align with the Milky Way during specific seasons, integrating astronomical observations with religious and architectural symbolism. The Mayan long count calendar represents one of the most sophisticated timekeeping systems ever developed, capable of tracking dates across millions of years with mathematical precision that surpasses the accuracy of our modern Gregorian calendar. This calendar system was based on astronomical observations and mathematical calculations that required extraordinary intellectual achievement. The long count tracked time in cycles of increasing length days, kin 20-day months, uinal 360-day years, tun 20-year periods katun, and 400-year cycles baktun. Larger cycles including the Pictun, 8,000 years, and Calebtun, 160,000 years, enabled Mayan scribes to record dates extending millions of years into both past and future. The mathematical precision of the long count required Mayan astronomers to calculate the exact length of the solar year as 365,420 days, more accurate than the Julian calendar used in Europe, and very close to the modern value of 365,422 days. This precision enabled them to maintain calendar accuracy across centuries without the need for frequent corrections. Mayan calendar calculations coordinated multiple cycles, simultaneously tracking not just solar years but lunar months, Venus cycles, and various ritual calendars that governed religious and political activities. The complexity of these interlocking cycles required mathematical sophistication that few ancient civilizations could match. The calendar round combined the 365-day solar year Harb with a 260-day ritual calendar Tzolk'in to create a 52-year cycle that formed the basis for Mayan chronology. Each day within this cycle had multiple calendar designations that provided precise dating and ritual significance. The accuracy of Mayan calendar calculations enabled them to maintain consistent chronology across their entire civilization, allowing different cities and regions to coordinate activities and share historical records. This calendrical precision was essential for maintaining the political and religious unity of Mayan civilization. Mayan calendar priests could calculate correlations between different calendar systems, converting dates between the long count calendar round and various local calendar variations. These calculations required understanding of complex mathematical relationships and the ability to work with enormous numbers representing vast time periods. The Mayan calendar's treatment of leap years and calendar corrections was more sophisticated than European calendar systems of the same period. While the Julian calendar accumulated errors that required eventual reform, Mayan calculations maintained accuracy across centuries through mathematical precision rather than arbitrary adjustments. Modern attempts to correlate Mayan dates with our calendar system have revealed the extraordinary accuracy of their chronological calculations. Events recorded in Mayan inscriptions can be dated precisely to specific days in our calendar, demonstrating the reliability of their mathematical and astronomical work. The religious and political significance of Mayan calendar calculations cannot be separated from their scientific achievements. Astronomical precision served the needs of a civilization where kings claimed divine authority and where the timing of ceremonies, warfare, and sacrifice was believed to determine the fate of communities and individuals. Mayan astronomical calculations were used to determine auspicious times for warfare, with military campaigns often timed to coincide with specific astronomical events that were believed to ensure victory. The complex Venus cycle was particularly important for timing military activities, as certain phases of Venus were considered favorable for war, while others demanded peace. Human sacrifice rituals were carefully timed according to astronomical calculations, with victims killed at moments when celestial alignments were believed to maximize the effectiveness of offerings to the gods. Eclipse events were particularly important for sacrifice, as the dramatic darkening of sun or moon was interpreted as evidence of divine hunger, requiring immediate blood offerings. Royal ceremonies, including coronations, marriages, and funerary rites, were scheduled according to complex astronomical calculations that considered multiple planetary cycles and calendar correlations. The legitimacy of Mayan rulers depended partly on their ability to perform these ceremonies at astronomically determined moments. The construction and dedication of temples and pyramids followed astronomical timelines that could span decades or centuries. Major architectural projects were planned to reach completion at specific astronomical moments, with building phases coordinated to astronomical cycles that were calculated years in advance. Mayan agricultural activities were guided by astronomical calculations that determined optimal times for planting, harvesting, and other farming activities. The precision of these calculations was crucial for agricultural success in regions where seasonal timing could determine whether crops succeeded or failed. Religious festivals and ceremonies throughout the Mayan world were coordinated according to shared astronomical calculations, creating a sense of temporal unity across the civilization. These celebrations reinforced social cohesion while demonstrating the power and knowledge of the priestly classes who controlled astronomical information. The ballgame that was central to Mayan religious life was often scheduled according to astronomical calculations, with important matches timed to coincide with celestial events. The outcomes of these games, which sometimes included human sacrifice of players or captives, were believed to influence cosmic balance and divine favor. Mayan trade expeditions and diplomatic missions were planned according to astronomical calendars that identified favorable times for travel and negotiation. The success of these ventures was believed to depend on proper astronomical timing as much as on practical preparation and political skill. The Maya developed sophisticated understanding of astronomical cycles that extended far beyond simple calendar keeping to encompass complex mathematical relationships between planetary movements, eclipse cycles, and seasonal changes. Their astronomical tables reveal knowledge of planetary periods that rival modern calculations. The Venus table in the Dresden Codex demonstrates Mayan understanding of Venus's complex synodic cycle, which they calculated as 584 days, exactly matching the modern value. This calculation required tracking Venus through hundreds of complete cycles and performing mathematical analysis to determine the precise period. Mayan astronomers understood that Venus's cycle could be subdivided into periods of morning star visibility, 236 days, superior conjunction, when Venus is hidden behind the Sun, 90 days, evening star visibility, 263 days, and inferior conjunction, when Venus passes between Earth and Sun 8 to 8 days. These precise calculations enabled detailed predictions of Venus's behavior. The Maya calculated Mars's synodic period as 780 days, very close to the modern value of 779 days. This calculation was particularly challenging because Mars's orbit is more elliptical than Venus's, creating irregular patterns that required sophisticated mathematical analysis to understand. Mayan eclipse prediction tables could forecast both solar and lunar eclipses across periods of centuries, indicating understanding of the complex geometric relationships that create eclipse conditions. Their eclipse calculations were organized into tables that predicted when eclipses would be visible from specific locations. The Maya identified what they called eclipse seasons, periods approximately every 6 months when eclipse conditions are possible. Their calculations predicted these seasons with accuracy that enabled them to prepare for eclipse events years in advance. Mayan astronomical knowledge included understanding of precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that causes gradual changes in star positions over centuries. This knowledge is evident in their long-term calendar calculations and astronomical alignments that account for gradual shifts in celestial patterns. The Jupiter table found in Mayan astronomical texts demonstrates their ability to track the movements of outer planets across periods of decades. Jupiter's 12-year orbit was incorporated into their calendar calculations and religious observances. Mayan astronomers understood the relationship between lunar months and solar years, calculating that 405 lunar months equal almost exactly 32 solar years. This knowledge enabled them to create lunisolar calendar systems that maintained accuracy across long periods. The Maya tracked the complex cycle of lunar eclipses, understanding that eclipse patterns repeat approximately every 18 years in what modern astronomers call the Saros cycle. Their eclipse tables reveal knowledge of these long-term patterns and the ability to predict eclipse recurrence across centuries. The decline of Mayan civilization in the 9th and 10th centuries CE resulted in the loss of much astronomical knowledge, as the complex educational systems that transmitted mathematical and astronomical learning to successive generations collapsed along with the political structures they served. The abandonment of major Mayan cities meant that astronomical observations and calculations that had continued for centuries were suddenly discontinued. The libraries and schools where astronomical knowledge was preserved and taught were abandoned, leading to the loss of accumulated learning that represented the work of generations. The Spanish conquest of Mesoamerica in the 16th century resulted in the systematic destruction of Mayan books and astronomical records. Spanish priests viewing Mayan knowledge as diabolic burned thousands of codices containing astronomical calculations and mathematical texts. Only 4 Mayan books survived the Spanish destruction: the Dresden, Madrid, Paris, and Grolier codices. These surviving texts provide glimpses of the astronomical sophistication that once characterized Mayan civilization, but they represent only a tiny fraction of the mathematical and astronomical knowledge that was lost. The suppression of Mayan astronomical traditions by Spanish colonial authorities meant that the knowledge of how to perform complex calculations and maintain accurate calendars was gradually forgotten. Native communities lost contact with the mathematical systems that had once enabled extraordinary scientific achievements. Modern efforts to reconstruct Mayan astronomical knowledge have revealed the sophistication of their calculations while highlighting how much was lost during the colonial period. Computer analysis of surviving astronomical tables has confirmed the accuracy of Mayan predictions and revealed mathematical techniques that are only now being fully understood. The decipherment of Mayan hieroglyphic writing in the 20th century enabled scholars to read astronomical texts and understand the mathematical basis for Mayan calendar calculations. This breakthrough revealed that Mayan astronomical knowledge was even more sophisticated than previously suspected. Archaeological investigations of Mayan observatories and temples have revealed the architectural precision with which astronomical alignments were incorporated into building designs. These studies demonstrate that Mayan astronomical knowledge influenced every aspect of their civilization, from city planning to religious architecture. Contemporary Mayan communities in Guatemala, Mexico, and Belize have preserved fragments of traditional astronomical knowledge, maintaining calendar systems and seasonal observations that provide connections to their ancestors' mathematical and astronomical achievements. The revival of interest in Mayan astronomy has led to new appreciation for indigenous scientific achievements and recognition that pre-Columbian civilizations achieved levels of mathematical sophistication that rival modern science in many respects. The legacy of Mayan astronomical calculations extends far beyond historical curiosity to influence modern understanding of indigenous science and the cultural contexts within which mathematical knowledge develops. Their achievements demonstrate that scientific sophistication can emerge from any cultural background when intellectual curiosity is combined with systematic observation and mathematical analysis. Mayan astronomy reminds us that scientific knowledge has always been embedded within cultural and religious frameworks that shape both the questions that get asked and the uses to which answers are put. The same mathematical precision that enabled extraordinary astronomical achievements also served political and religious purposes that modern people find morally troubling. The contrast between Mayan scientific brilliance and their practice of human sacrifice illustrates the complex relationship between intellectual achievement and moral development. Advanced mathematical knowledge doesn't necessarily lead to what we would consider enlightened social practices, and scientific sophistication can serve purposes that we find abhorrent. Modern science can learn from Mayan approaches to long-term observation and data collection that enabled them to achieve remarkable precision without modern instruments. Their patient accumulation of astronomical observations across centuries demonstrates the value of sustained scientific programs that extend beyond individual lifetimes. The Mayan example also reveals how scientific knowledge can be lost when the social and political systems that support it collapse. The destruction of their astronomical libraries reminds us of the fragility of scientific knowledge and the importance of preserving and transmitting intellectual achievements across generations. Standing today among the ruins of Mayan observatories, visitors can still see the stone alignments that enabled astronomers to track planetary movements with extraordinary precision. These architectural monuments to mathematical achievement remind us that human intellectual capability has always exceeded our moral wisdom, and that the same minds that can calculate the movements of planets across centuries can also devise systems of oppression and violence. The astronomy of the ancient Maya reveals both the heights of human intellectual achievement and the depths of human cruelty, showing how brilliance and brutality can coexist within the same civilization. Their legacy challenges us to appreciate scientific achievement while remembering the human costs of the systems that made such achievements possible. Japanese Samurai Honor Code. In feudal Japan, death was not the enemy, dishonor was. For over 7 centuries, samurai warriors lived by a code so rigid and unforgiving that it made ordinary survival instincts not just irrelevant, but contemptible. The way of the warrior, or bushido, demanded that death be embraced before dishonor, that loyalty to one's lord transcend all personal desires, and that ritual suicide become an art form designed to preserve dignity in defeat. This wasn't simply military discipline or battlefield bravery. The samurai code created a complete philosophy of life that placed honor above survival duty, above personal desire, and social obligations above individual rights. To live as a samurai meant accepting that your life belonged not to yourself but to your lord, your clan, and an abstract concept of honor that demanded ultimate sacrifice without hesitation or question. You might imagine that you could adapt to such a system that your survival instincts and rational self-interest would help you navigate the demands of samurai society. But the code of Bushido was designed specifically to eliminate such calculations, replacing normal human responses with conditioned reflexes that valued death over life whenever honor was at stake. Welcome to a world where the ultimate virtue was the willingness to die, where failure meant not just personal disgrace, but the destruction of your family's reputation for generations, and where the art of suicide was practiced with the same dedication that other cultures devoted to the preservation of life. The foundation of samurai existence rested on absolute loyalty to one's lord. a devotion so complete that it eliminated personal will and individual desire from all meaningful decisions. This loyalty wasn't simply political or military, but spiritual, creating a bond between warrior and master that transcended normal human relationships and approached religious devotion. The samurai served not just as soldiers, but as the personal property of their daimyo, bound by obligations that controlled every aspect of their existence, from martial training to marriage choices. Their loyalty was expected to extend beyond the lord's lifetime, with many samurai choosing death when their masters died rather than face the shame of serving another or living as masterless ronin. This absolute loyalty created a hierarchy of obligation that placed the lord's will above all other considerations, including family relationships, personal safety, and individual moral judgment. A samurai who received an order from his lord was expected to obey without question, even if the command violated his personal beliefs or endangered his family. The intensity of this loyalty was demonstrated through countless acts of self-sacrifice that served no practical military purpose but reinforced the spiritual bond between warrior and lord. Samurai would die to protect their master's reputation, commit suicide to atone for their lord's failures, or sacrifice their own families to demonstrate their devotion. The psychological conditioning required to maintain such absolute loyalty began in childhood and continued throughout a samurai's life through constant reinforcement of duty over desire. Young samurai were taught to suppress natural impulses towards self-preservation and personal happiness in favor of unwavering service to their social superiors. This loyalty system created its own moral framework that often conflicted with universal ethical principles, leading samurai to commit acts of violence and cruelty in service to their lords that they would never have considered acceptable in other contexts. The code demanded that loyalty to one's master override compassion for others or concern for justice. The emotional cost of maintaining such absolute loyalty was enormous, as samurai had to suppress normal human feelings of love, fear, and self-interest in favor of mechanical obedience to their superiors. Many samurai lived in a state of constant internal tension between their human impulses and their social obligations. The loyalty demanded by Bushido extended beyond the individual samurai to encompass entire families and clans, creating networks of obligation that could persist across generations. The failure of one family member to demonstrate proper loyalty could bring disgrace upon relatives who had no control over his actions. The samurai understanding of honor was so complex and demanding that it required constant vigilance to maintain, and could be destroyed by actions that other cultures would consider trivial or unavoidable. Honor wasn't just about courage in battle, but encompassed every aspect of behavior, speech, and social interaction. Samurai honor could be damaged by showing fear, expressing doubt about orders, failing to achieve military objectives, or even surviving battles where their lords or comrades died. The code created impossible standards that meant dishonor was always possible and often unavoidable, regardless of a warrior's intentions or efforts. The collective nature of samurai honor meant that an individual's disgrace reflected upon his entire family clan and social network. This created enormous pressure to maintain honorable behavior, while ensuring that any failure to meet these standards had consequences extending far beyond the individual who had failed. The samurai concept of honor was largely performative, concerned more with appearance and social perception than with internal moral states or actual achievements. What mattered was not whether a samurai was genuinely brave, loyal, or virtuous, but whether he was seen to embody these qualities by others whose opinions mattered. This emphasis on appearance created elaborate systems of ritual behavior designed to demonstrate honorable qualities through prescribed actions and responses. Samurai society developed complex protocols for every social situation, with specific behaviors required to maintain honor in different circumstances. The arbitrary nature of many honor requirements meant that samurai could lose their status through accidents, misunderstandings, or circumstances beyond their control. A stumble at the wrong moment, a misinterpreted gesture, or failure to perform a ritual correctly could result in permanent disgrace. The restoration of lost honor often required extreme actions, including suicide, exile, or undertaking impossible missions that would likely result in death. The code provided few opportunities for redemption and no concept of forgiveness for serious honor violations. The psychological burden of maintaining honor under such demanding conditions created intense anxiety and stress among samurai who lived in constant fear of inadvertent disgrace. This pressure contributed to the rigid behavioral patterns and emotional suppression that characterized samurai society. When dishonor became unavoidable, the samurai code provided a solution that was both practical and spiritual. Seppuku, or ritual suicide, performed with such precision and ceremony that death itself became an art form designed to restore honor through perfect execution of self-destruction. Seppuku wasn't simply suicide, but a complex ritual that required months of preparation, elaborate ceremonies and witnesses, whose role was to ensure that the death achieved its purpose of restoring honor to the individual and his family. The ritual transformed death from defeat into victory over dishonor. The physical process of seppuku involved cutting open the abdomen with a short sword in a specific pattern that maximized pain while ensuring eventual death. The samurai was expected to endure this agony without showing weakness, demonstrating his spiritual strength and commitment to honor even in the moment of death. The presence of a kaishakunin, or second, who would decapitate the samurai at the moment of greatest suffering, was both practical and symbolic. This assistant prevented the prolonging of agony while ensuring that the samurai couldn't survive his suicide attempt, which would compound his dishonor rather than resolving it. The elaborate preparations for seppuku included writing death poems that captured the samurai's final thoughts and spiritual state, arranging personal affairs to minimize the impact on family members, and choosing witnesses whose presence would validate the honor restoration achieved through perfect ritual death. The timing and location of seppuku were carefully chosen to maximize its effectiveness in restoring honor and demonstrating the depth of the samurai's commitment to proper behavior. Public ceremonies in significant locations with important witnesses enhanced the ritual's power to rehabilitate the suicide's reputation. The success of seppuku in restoring honor depended on perfect execution of every aspect of the ritual, from the preliminary preparations through the final moment of death. Any deviation from proper procedure could transform an honorable death into additional disgrace, making the ritual itself a final test of samurai discipline. The spiritual dimensions of seppuku reflected Buddhist and Shinto beliefs about death rebirth and the relationship between physical existence and spiritual achievement. Samurai viewed ritual suicide not as destruction, but as transformation, a means of transcending the limitations of physical life to achieve spiritual perfection through perfect adherence to the code of honor. The meditation and spiritual preparation that preceded seppuku often lasted for days or weeks, during which the samurai would compose his death poem, reflect on his life's actions, and prepare his mind for the transition from life to death. This preparation was considered as important as the physical act of suicide itself. The death poem, or jisei no ku, became the samurai's final statement of his spiritual state and understanding of the honor code. These poems were often highly refined works of art that captured in a few lines the warrior's acceptance of death and his commitment to the principles that made suicide necessary. The witnesses to seppuku weren't merely observers, but participants in a spiritual ceremony that validated the samurai's achievement of honorable death. Their presence transformed individual suicide into communal affirmation of the values that made such death meaningful and necessary. The samurai understanding of seppuku as spiritual achievement rather than defeat enabled warriors to approach their own death with a calmness and dignity that impressed even foreign observers who found the practice barbaric. This transformation of death into victory represented one of the most psychologically sophisticated aspects of the honor code. The physical training that prepared samurai for seppuku included not just sword work, but meditation practices designed to develop mental control over pain, fear, and attachment to life. Warriors practiced enduring physical discomfort and psychological stress as preparation for the ultimate test of their discipline. The detailed protocols governing seppuku ensured that even in death, samurai behavior remained regulated by social expectations and ritual requirements. The code controlled not just how warriors lived, but how they died, extending its authority into the final moments of existence. The effectiveness of seppuku in restoring honor created a powerful incentive for samurai to choose death over life in circumstances where other cultures might seek alternative solutions. The availability of honorable suicide as an option influenced decision-making throughout samurai society. The samurai approach to warfare reflected their honor code's emphasis on personal conduct over practical military effectiveness. Battle became as much about demonstrating proper warrior behavior as about achieving tactical objectives, leading to fighting methods that often prioritized honor over survival or strategic success. Individual combat between samurai warriors followed elaborate protocols that ensured both fighters had opportunities to demonstrate their courage, skill, and adherence to proper forms. These duels were often more like ritual performances than practical fighting, with specific procedures governing everything from initial challenges to final death scenes. The samurai preference for face-to-face combat with edged weapons over more effective but less honorable military technologies reflected their belief that true warrior virtue could only be demonstrated through personal risk and individual skill. Firearms and other distance weapons were considered less honorable than swords and spears. The treatment of defeated enemies in samurai warfare was governed by honor codes that required respect for worthy opponents while demanding harsh treatment of those who failed to fight according to proper standards. Honorable enemies might be allowed ritual suicide, while dishonorable ones faced execution or humiliation. The concept of honorable retreat was so restrictive that samurai often chose death over withdrawal, even when tactical considerations clearly favored strategic retreat. The code made survival without victory a form of dishonor that was worse than death in battle. The seasonal nature of traditional Japanese warfare reflected the honor code's integration with natural cycles and agricultural demands. Campaigns were often suspended during planting and harvest seasons, with honor obligations taking precedence over military advantages that might be gained through continuous fighting. The elaborate armor and weapons used by samurai served symbolic and ceremonial purposes as much as practical military ones. The beauty and craftsmanship of samurai equipment demonstrated the warrior's aesthetic refinement and social status while providing identification on the battlefield. The practice of collecting enemy heads as trophies reflected the honor code's emphasis on individual achievement and recognition. These grisly souvenirs provided proof of a warrior's courage and skill, while serving as offerings to ancestors and demonstrations of loyalty to one's lord. The samurai approach to siege warfare and castle defense often prioritized dramatic gestures and heroic sacrifices over effective military tactics. Warriors would undertake hopeless charges or suicidal missions to demonstrate their honor, rather than adopting defensive strategies that might ensure survival but seemed less glorious. The integration of poetry, art, and cultural refinement into samurai education reflected the honor code's demand that warriors achieve perfection in all aspects of human development. Military skill alone was insufficient. True samurai had to master aesthetic and intellectual pursuits as well. The samurai education system began in early childhood with training in physical skills, moral principles, and cultural accomplishments that were all considered essential for proper warrior development. Children learned to suppress emotions, endure pain, and prioritize duty over desire from their earliest years. The study of classical Chinese literature, Japanese poetry, and Confucian philosophy was considered as important as martial training in developing proper samurai character. Warriors were expected to demonstrate cultural sophistication and intellectual achievement alongside their military capabilities. The tea ceremony, flower arrangement, and other aesthetic practices were integrated into samurai education as means of developing the mental discipline and attention to detail required for both combat and proper social behavior. These peaceful arts reinforced the same values of precision and perfection demanded in warfare. The religious education of samurai combined Buddhist meditation practices, Shinto ritual observances, and Confucian ethical teachings into a comprehensive worldview that justified the honor code while providing spiritual frameworks for understanding duty, loyalty, and sacrifice. The apprenticeship system that trained young samurai placed them under the direct supervision of experienced warriors who served as both military instructors and moral guides. This personal relationship ensured that the honor code was transmitted not just as abstract principles but as lived experiences. The emphasis on calligraphy in samurai education reflected the importance of written communication in maintaining social relationships and demonstrating cultural refinement. Beautiful handwriting was considered evidence of spiritual discipline and aesthetic sensitivity. The study of military classics and historical examples provided samurai with models of proper warrior behavior while reinforcing the values and expectations that governed their own conduct. These texts created a shared cultural vocabulary of honor and duty that unified samurai society. The integration of physical and spiritual training in samurai education reflected the belief that true warrior achievement required development of both body and mind. Neither martial skill nor cultural accomplishment alone was sufficient for complete samurai development. The decline of samurai power during the Tokugawa period 1603-1608 created a crisis of identity for a warrior class that no longer had opportunities to demonstrate their military virtue through actual combat. The honor code that had developed during centuries of warfare struggled to adapt to peacetime conditions. The Meiji Restoration of 1868 and subsequent modernization of Japan effectively ended the samurai system by abolishing their legal privileges and military monopoly. The introduction of Western military technologies and organizational methods made traditional samurai warfare obsolete. The samurai response to modernization varied from acceptance and adaptation to desperate resistance and nostalgic retreat into traditional practices. Some former samurai embraced new opportunities in government business and education, while others struggled to find meaning in a world that no longer valued their traditional skills. The Satsuma Rebellion of 1877 represented the final attempt by traditional samurai to resist modernization through armed force. The defeat of Saigo Takamori and his followers marked the end of samurai political power and military relevance. The transformation of the honor code during the Meiji period saw some samurai values absorbed into broader Japanese culture, while others were abandoned as incompatible with modern society. Concepts of loyalty, duty, and self-sacrifice persisted in modified forms, while practices like seppuku became largely ceremonial. The romanticization of samurai culture during the late 19th and early 20th centuries created popular mythologies that often obscured the harsh realities of the honor code while celebrating its more appealing aspects. This selective memory influenced both Japanese and foreign perceptions of samurai society. The influence of samurai values on modern Japanese culture can be seen in business practices, educational methods, and social expectations that emphasize group loyalty, personal discipline, and dedication to perfection. However, these modern applications lack the life-or-death intensity of the original honor code. The study of samurai history and culture has revealed both the achievements and the costs of a social system that demanded ultimate sacrifice from its members while creating remarkable levels of personal discipline and cultural refinement. The samurai example illustrates both the potential and the dangers of organizing society around absolute principles. The legacy of the samurai honor code extends beyond Japan to influence global perceptions of warrior culture, personal discipline, and the relationship between individual desire and social obligation. However, this influence often overlooks the psychological costs and social limitations of a system that prioritized honor over life. Modern martial arts and spiritual practices that claim samurai origins typically emphasize the discipline and aesthetic aspects of the tradition while avoiding its more extreme demands. This selective adoption allows contemporary practitioners to benefit from samurai training methods without accepting the full implications of the honor code. The samurai example demonstrates how cultural values can be internalized so completely that they override basic survival instincts and reshape fundamental human responses to danger, pain, and death. This psychological transformation represents both a remarkable achievement and a cautionary tale about the power of social conditioning. Understanding the samurai honor code requires recognizing that it represented a complete worldview that made perfect sense within its own context, while appearing extreme or even pathological from other perspectives. The code wasn't simply a military discipline, but a comprehensive philosophy that addressed every aspect of human existence. The samurai commitment to honor over life challenges modern assumptions about the value of individual survival and personal happiness. Their willingness to choose death over dishonor reflects priorities that are foreign to contemporary Western culture, but which made perfect sense within their own social and spiritual framework. The efficiency with which samurai society inculcated its values reveals the power of comprehensive social conditioning when it's applied consistently from childhood through adulthood. The honor code succeeded in creating warriors who genuinely preferred death to dishonor, demonstrating the plasticity of human psychology under sustained cultural pressure. Standing today in the gardens of ancient samurai residences or among the ruins of castle fortifications, visitors can sense the intensity of the commitment that once defined these spaces. Here lived men and women who accepted that their lives belonged not to themselves, but to abstract principles of honor and duty that demanded ultimate sacrifice without question or hesitation. The Samurai Honor Code reminds us that human societies can create value systems so powerful that they override the basic biological drive for survival, transforming death from the ultimate defeat into the highest achievement. This transformation represents both the pinnacle of cultural conditioning and a cautionary example of how social expectations can completely reshape human nature. The way of the warrior was never just about fighting. It was about creating human beings so thoroughly conditioned by their culture that they could choose death over dishonor without hesitation, finding in suicide not defeat but victory over the limitations of ordinary existence. This achievement came at enormous human cost, but it created a form of personal discipline and cultural unity that continues to fascinate and disturb observers centuries after the last samurai drew his sword in defense of a dying world. History of lighthouse technology. The difference between life and death for countless mariners depended on a single beam of light piercing the darkness across miles of treacherous water. For over 2 millennia, lighthouse keepers maintained these crucial beacons through storms, wars, and personal hardships, creating one of civilization's most essential and dangerous professions. These solitary guardians of the coast held responsibility for lives they would never meet, ships they would never see, and cargoes whose safe passage might determine the survival of distant communities. The history of lighthouse technology is also the history of humanity's battle against the darkness that claimed more ships and lives than all naval warfare combined. From ancient beacon fires to modern automated systems, the evolution of lighthouse design represents an ongoing struggle to project light farther, burn brighter, and operate more reliably under conditions that destroyed most other technologies. But lighthouses were more than just navigation aids. They were symbols of civilization's reach into the wilderness, lonely outposts where individuals accepted isolation and danger to serve the common good. The men and women who tended these lights lived lives that few modern people could endure, maintaining complex mechanical systems through storms that could kill, ice that could blind, and isolation that could drive the unprepared mad. Welcome to the world of lighthouse technology, where the simple act of keeping a light burning became one of humanity's most crucial and demanding occupations, and where the failure of a single lamp could mean the difference between safe harbor and disaster for hundreds of souls, depending on that distant beacon to guide them home. The earliest lighthouses were nothing more than fires built on high places, but even these primitive beacons represented sophisticated understanding of optics, fuel management, and the relationship between height and visibility that would guide lighthouse design for centuries. The ancient pharaohs of Alexandria, built around 280 BCE, stood over 400 feet tall and used mirrors to reflect firelight across the Mediterranean, establishing principles of lighthouse construction that influenced designs well into the modern era. Ancient lighthouse keepers faced challenges that make modern lighthouse maintenance seem routine. Wood fires required constant attention to prevent them from dying out in wind or rain, while oil-fed flames demanded careful management of fuel supplies that had to be carried up hundreds of steps multiple times each day. The smoke from these fires often obscured their own light, requiring constant adjustment of fuel types and burning techniques. The fuel crisis faced by ancient lighthouses was solved through various innovations, including whale oil, which burned cleaner and brighter than wood or coal, but at an enormous cost in both money and human effort. A single large lighthouse might consume hundreds of gallons of whale oil per night, making it one of the most expensive public works projects that ancient governments could undertake. Roman lighthouse technology included sophisticated systems for protecting flames from wind, while maximizing their visibility using bronze mirrors and glass lenses to focus and amplify relatively small fires into beams visible for dozens of miles. These early optical systems established the fundamental principles that would guide lighthouse lens design into the modern era. The medieval period brought both technological advances and dangerous complications to lighthouse maintenance. Improved metalworking enabled construction of more sophisticated fuel delivery systems and flame protection devices, while the breakdown of centralized government often left lighthouse maintenance to local communities who couldn't afford proper upkeep. Medieval lighthouse keepers often lived in conditions that would be considered unacceptable for prisoners occupying small chambers within the lighthouse structure, with minimal protection from weather and no reliable source of food or fresh water. Many lighthouse positions were essentially exile postings for criminals or social outcasts who had few other options for employment. The religious significance of lighthouses during the medieval period led to their association with monasteries and religious orders, whose members often took responsibility for maintaining coastal beacons as part of their spiritual duties. These religious lighthouse keepers often worked without pay, viewing their service as a form of penance or devotion. The development of glass-making technology during the Renaissance enabled construction of lantern rooms that protected flames from weather while allowing light to pass through transparent barriers. This innovation dramatically improved lighthouse reliability while reducing the fuel consumption required to maintain adequate light levels. The introduction of coal as lighthouse fuel created new challenges and opportunities for lighthouse designers. Coal burned hotter and longer than wood but produced dense smoke that could obscure the light, requiring sophisticated chimney systems and air circulation designs that added complexity to lighthouse construction and maintenance. Early modern lighthouse keepers developed elaborate techniques for managing different types of fuel under varying weather conditions, becoming experts in combustion engineering who could maintain steady light output despite storms, temperature changes, and fuel quality variations that would defeat less skilled operators. The Fresnel lens, invented in 1822 by Augustin Jean Fresnel, revolutionized lighthouse technology by concentrating light into precise beams that could be seen at much greater distances than previous systems. These intricate glass constructions used hundreds of carefully shaped prisms to capture and focus light with an efficiency that seemed almost magical to contemporary observers. The construction and installation of Fresnel lenses required craftsmen with skills that approached artistry, as each lens was essentially a custom-built optical instrument designed for the specific requirements of its lighthouse location. The largest first-order Fresnel lenses stood over 12 feet tall and weighed several tons, representing some of the most complex optical devices of their era. The maintenance of Fresnel lenses demanded specialized knowledge and extraordinary care, as the cleaning and adjustment of hundreds of individual glass elements required understanding of optics, mechanics, and materials science that few lighthouse keepers possessed. Specialized lighthouse technicians traveled between installations to maintain and repair these complex systems. The rotation mechanisms that turned Fresnel lenses to create flashing patterns used clockwork systems powered by weights that had to be wound regularly, creating lighthouse operations that resembled giant clocks requiring constant attention. These mechanical systems enabled lighthouses to display distinctive flashing patterns that helped mariners identify specific locations. The automation of lighthouse operations during the 19th century reduced the need for full-time lighthouse keepers, while creating new technical challenges related to remote monitoring and maintenance of mechanical systems. These early automation systems used innovative approaches, including wind-powered mechanisms and gravity-fed oil systems. The introduction of electric lighting in the late 19th century transformed lighthouse technology while creating new requirements for power generation and electrical maintenance in remote locations. Early electric lighthouses used local generators powered by wind steam or oil engines that required specialized technical knowledge to operate reliably. The standardization of lighthouse designs during the 19th century enabled mass production of lighthouse components while reducing the specialized knowledge required for construction and maintenance. Standard lens assemblies, lamp systems, and rotation mechanisms could be manufactured centrally and shipped to lighthouse locations worldwide. The development of radio navigation aids in the 20th century began the gradual displacement of traditional lighthouse technology, as electronic systems could provide more precise navigation information than visual beacons. However, lighthouses remained important backup systems and continued to serve areas where radio signals were unreliable. The daily life of lighthouse keepers involved routines that would challenge the psychological stability of most modern people, as the work required absolute reliability under conditions of extreme isolation and personal danger. Lighthouse keepers lived with constant awareness that their negligence could cause disasters claiming hundreds of lives. The lighthouse keeper's day began before dawn with inspection and maintenance of the lighting apparatus, including cleaning lenses, trimming wicks, refilling oil reservoirs, and checking mechanical systems for proper operation. This maintenance had to be performed regardless of weather conditions, even during storms that made climbing to the lantern room life-threatening. Weather monitoring was a crucial aspect of lighthouse keeping, as keepers had to predict when storms might threaten shipping and ensure that their lights would be operating at maximum efficiency during the most dangerous conditions. Many lighthouse keepers became skilled amateur meteorologists whose weather predictions were more accurate than official forecasts. The isolation of lighthouse duty created psychological challenges that drove many keepers to alcoholism, mental illness, or suicide. Months of solitude with only occasional supply boats for human contact created conditions that tested the limits of human social adaptation, leading to elaborate hiring and screening procedures designed to identify individuals capable of enduring extended isolation. Family life for lighthouse keepers was complicated by the remote locations and demanding schedules that lighthouse duty required. Keeper families often lived for years without regular contact with outside communities, creating unique family dynamics and child-rearing challenges that influenced entire generations. The mechanical skills required for lighthouse maintenance made keepers into multi-talented craftsmen who could repair everything from clockwork mechanisms to steam engines using only basic tools and improvised materials. These skills were essential because replacement parts or technical assistance might not be available for months during severe weather. The record-keeping responsibilities of lighthouse keepers included maintaining detailed logs of weather conditions, shipping traffic, and equipment performance that provided valuable data for navigation and weather services. These records often represent the only reliable information about conditions in remote coastal areas during historical periods. Emergency response was a crucial aspect of lighthouse keeping, as keepers often served as the first and only assistance available to ships in distress. Lighthouse keepers rescued thousands of shipwreck survivors over the centuries, often at great personal risk and with minimal equipment. The supply chain logistics required to maintain remote lighthouses created complex planning challenges, as everything from food to fuel had to be transported to locations that were often accessible only during calm weather. Poor planning or supply failures could leave lighthouse keepers stranded without essential supplies for months. The training required for lighthouse keeping involved learning specialized skills including optics, mechanics, meteorology, and emergency medicine that were rarely needed in other occupations. New lighthouse keepers often underwent apprenticeships, lasting months or years before being trusted with independent responsibility for maintaining a light. The transition from manned to automated lighthouses during the 20th century eliminated one of the world's most challenging and essential occupations, as technological advances made human lighthouse keepers unnecessary for the first time in over 2,000 years. Modern automated lighthouses operate reliably with minimal maintenance while providing navigation services that exceed the capabilities of traditional manned installations. The automation systems used in modern lighthouses include solar power generation LED lighting, GPS synchronized flashing patterns, and remote monitoring capabilities that enable lighthouse maintenance to be managed from central facilities. These systems can operate for months without human intervention, while providing more reliable service than manned lighthouses. The removal of lighthouse keepers from remote installations eliminated the human cost of lighthouse maintenance, while reducing the personal connection between lighthouse operations and the communities they served. Automated lighthouses function as anonymous technological systems rather than personal services provided by dedicated individuals. The preservation of historic lighthouses has become an important cultural and historical project, as these structures represent significant architectural and technological achievements while memorializing the individuals who dedicated their lives to maintaining them. Many former lighthouses now serve as museums, tourist attractions, or historical landmarks. The role of lighthouses in modern navigation has been largely superseded by GPS and electronic navigation systems, but many lighthouses continue to operate as backup systems and aids to local navigation. The visual confirmation provided by lighthouse beacons remains valuable for mariners operating in areas where electronic systems might be unreliable. The lighthouse keeper's cottage and the solitary figure tending the beacon have become powerful cultural symbols representing dedication, isolation, and service to community needs that transcend personal comfort. These images continue to resonate in literature, art, and popular culture as representations of individual sacrifice for the common good. The technical knowledge developed through centuries of lighthouse operations contributed to advances in optics, mechanical engineering, and automation systems that influenced many other fields. The precision required for lighthouse lens construction and maintenance helped develop manufacturing and quality control techniques used in other optical industries. The meteorological data collected by lighthouse keepers over centuries provides valuable historical information about climate patterns, storm frequencies, and weather changes that continues to be used by researchers studying long-term environmental trends. These records represent some of the most consistent and long-term weather observations available for coastal regions. The lighthouse represents humanity's commitment to creating technological solutions for fundamental navigation challenges, demonstrating how relatively simple technologies can save countless lives when properly designed and maintained. The basic principle of using light to guide navigation remains relevant even in the age of satellite navigation. Standing today beside an automated lighthouse, visitors can appreciate the technological sophistication of modern navigation systems, while remembering the individuals who once maintained these lights through conditions that would challenge the strongest modern equipment. The lighthouse reminds us that some of our most essential technologies depend on human dedication and sacrifice that we rarely acknowledge or understand. The evolution of lighthouse technology, from ancient beacon fires to modern automated systems, represents humanity's ongoing effort to make the dangerous business of sea travel safer and more reliable. Each advance in lighthouse design and operation saved lives that would otherwise have been lost to the darkness and treacherous coasts that claimed so many ships throughout maritime history. The lighthouse keeper's vigil is over now, replaced by automated systems that provide more reliable service with less human cost. But the towers remain as monuments to the individuals who accepted isolation danger and responsibility for maintaining the lights that guided countless mariners safely home. Their dedication reminds us that civilization depends on people willing to serve essential functions regardless of personal cost, maintaining the systems that enable communities to survive and prosper. The light still shines, but no human hand tends the flame. The beam still sweeps across dark waters, but no solitary figure watches through the night for ships in distress. Technology has made the lighthouse keeper's sacrifice unnecessary, but it cannot diminish the meaning of their service or erase the memory of the countless lives saved by their dedication to keeping the light burning against the darkness. Conclusion. From the doomed passengers of the Titanic to the solitary lighthouse keepers who guided ships safely to shore, these stories reveal fundamental truths about human nature when faced with circumstances that test the very limits of endurance, ingenuity, and moral character. Each tale demonstrates how quickly the familiar comforts of civilization can disappear, leaving individuals to confront raw survival challenges that strip away social pretenses and reveal what lies beneath. The survivors of the Titanic discovered that survival often depended more on random factors: ticket class proximity to lifeboats, the arbitrary accident of being awake when disaster struck, than on moral character or personal courage. Their experience reminds us that disasters don't discriminate based on virtue, even when the systems we create to respond to them do. Nikola Tesla's eccentric genius shows us how the same mental processes that enable extraordinary scientific achievement can also trap brilliant minds in compulsive behaviors that make normal life nearly impossible. His story illustrates both the power and the perils of intellectual brilliance when it's not balanced by practical wisdom and social understanding. The Mayan astronomers achieved mathematical precision that rivaled modern science while serving a civilization that demanded human sacrifice to appease divine forces. Their legacy demonstrates that scientific sophistication doesn't necessarily lead to moral enlightenment, and that advanced knowledge can serve purposes we find morally abhorrent. The samurai honor code created warriors so thoroughly conditioned by their culture that they could choose death over dishonor, without hesitation transforming suicide from defeat into victory over the limitations of ordinary existence. Their example reveals both the power of cultural conditioning and the human capacity to internalize values so completely that they override basic survival instincts. The lighthouse keepers who maintained humanity's battle against the darkness that claimed countless ships accepted isolation danger and responsibility for lives they would never meet. Their dedication reminds us that civilization depends on individuals willing to serve essential functions regardless of personal cost. These stories share common themes that illuminate enduring aspects of human nature: the fragility of technological confidence, the persistence of social hierarchies, even in crisis, the power of cultural conditioning to shape behavior, and the capacity for both remarkable achievement and terrible cruelty that exists within the same individuals and societies. They remind us that the comforts and securities we take for granted emerged from humanity's long struggle against forces that routinely tested the limits of what it means to be human. The electric lights that illuminate our homes, the wireless communications that connect us globally, the mathematical principles that enable modern technology, the concepts of honor and duty that still influence our behavior, and the navigation systems that make travel safe, all bear the imprint of individuals who faced circumstances that would challenge our strongest assumptions about survival achievement and moral choice. Perhaps most importantly, these stories reveal that human beings possess reserves of strength, ingenuity, and endurance that are rarely tested in ordinary circumstances but emerge when survival itself hangs in the balance. They also show us the costs of such achievements, the psychological damage, social inequalities, and moral compromises that often accompany our greatest accomplishments. As we face our own challenges in an increasingly complex and unpredictable world, these historical examples remind us that resilience, creativity, and moral courage remain as relevant today as they were centuries ago. The specific dangers may have changed, but the fundamental human qualities needed to confront them remain constant. The Titanic lies on the ocean floor. Tesla's laboratory has long since crumbled. The Mayan cities are overgrown with jungle. The samurai have vanished into history, and automated systems have replaced the lighthouse keepers. But their stories endure as testaments to both human achievement and human limitation, reminding us that we are capable of extraordinary things when necessity demands, but that every advance comes with costs that we must acknowledge and learn from. In the end, these tales of survival and achievement, genius and obsession, precision and brutality, honor and sacrifice, remind us that being human means living with contradictions we cannot resolve, facing challenges we cannot fully prepare for, and making choices whose consequences extend far beyond our own lives. They challenge us to appreciate the fragility of our achievements, while drawing strength from the examples of those who came before us facing their own impossible circumstances with whatever courage, wisdom, and humanity they could muster.